Right as I was replacing the last valve on my late father's irrigation line, something we'd planned since the drought, Karen called the cops. Name's Hollis Crane, retired infrastructure engineer. Still own the land under half this cul-de-sac. The county parcel map was folded in my back pocket. No one asked to see it until they had to. Has anyone ever tried to punish you on your own land, and it backfired beautifully? At 6:14 a.m., the sun already had a grip on the roof tiles, casting sharp angular shadows across the gravel. The light hadn't even softened yet. It was harsh and white, the kind that baked stucco walls and made the whole desert hum with anticipation. I was tightening a valve under the east side spigot when I heard the gravel crunch twice, then pause. I looked up and saw two uniformed officers advancing up my lawn, one with a clipboard, the other already touching his shoulder mic. Across the cul-de-sac, Retta Vornell stood on her porch, her phone camera aimed squarely at me, her other hand pointing like she was calling in an airstrike. She wore her HOA badge around her neck. Yes, she had a badge, though I'd never seen it used for anything other than neighborly intimidation. Her hair, a shellacked auburn helmet, didn't move in the breeze, but her jaw sure did. "That's him," she called. "Unauthorized plumbing modifications. I warned him twice last week." One of the officers nodded politely toward her, then turned back to me. "Morning, sir. We received a complaint about unpermitted plumbing activity on HOA-maintained infrastructure." Mind showing us some documentation I could have answered. I could have handed them a pile of scanned permits, grandfather clauses, and legal plat maps from 1993. Instead, I sat back on my heels, wiped my hands on the front of my jeans, and said, "Sure. Hang on." I stood up slowly on purpose and walked into the house without another word. Retta's voice followed me. "See, he's hiding the modifications. He knows they're illegal." Inside, I didn't reach for a folder. I didn't rummage through filing cabinets or log into the county's permit database. I poured myself a cup of coffee, opened the blinds just enough to keep them nervous, and then waited a full 90 seconds. When I returned coffee in hand, both officers were still standing where I'd left them. Retta was still filming, narrating breathlessly. I took a long sip, then said, "You might want to check County Parcel 19B, subsection 3. The younger officer blinked. "Sorry." "The registry," I said. "It'll clarify ownership, infrastructure rights, boundaries." He looked at his partner, who was already unclipping a radio from his vest. He spoke softly into it, head-tilted eyes darting back and forth between me and his notes. Retta's voice trembled now. "It's HOA land. I have the bylaws. He's been warned. We have standards." "Ma'am," the officer said, squinting at the info coming through his earpiece. "According to county records, that water system, including the subterranean feed lines, belongs to Mr. Hollis Crane." She stepped back. "That can't be right." "I have the handbook. No violations on file," he continued. "And the registry shows legal private ownership of the utility lines from 1993. It predates the HOA. My favorite part, the part I'll probably remember longer than I remember my own wedding vows." Retta lowered her phone but forgot to stop recording. Her voice caught like a clutch, misfiring. The officers nodded to me. No citation, no reprimand. Just a polite, "Sorry for the early hour, sir. Thank you for your time." They left in reverse polite retreat. Retta stood motionless for a moment longer before retreating into her air-conditioned fortress. The screen door didn't even slam. It whispered shut, like it was embarrassed for her. I sat on the porch steps, still holding my coffee, letting it go lukewarm while the heat rippled off the concrete. A hummingbird buzzed past, oblivious to the drama, headed straight for the parched lemon tree out back. The wood of the porch rail was rough under my hand, sun-bleached dry, but still sturdy. 2 years ago, I'd bolted a sign onto the easement fence. It read, "Private utility, no access." Simple enough, county-approved language. Bright red letters on white aluminum. Not a threat, just information. Last week, it vanished. No note, no knock on the door, no HOA memo, just gone. I didn't report it. I figured, as with most things around here, the game had already begun, and I'd rather not show my cards too soon. In Cottonwood Heights, subtlety was a form of survival. It wasn't about plumbing. Not really. It never was. Plumbing was just the excuse of the week. The truth was simpler and older. Retta Vornell didn't like that I didn't need the HOA. Didn't fear them. That I owned something she couldn't regulate. A pipe might as well be a kingdom if it bypassed her throne. And now, with 2 cops dismissed and no citation issued, I wasn't just her neighbor, I was a threat. The camera footage she filmed that morning, she probably replayed it hoping to see herself victorious. Instead, it showed her making a claim she couldn't back up, drawing battle lines she didn't understand. Somewhere between the gravel and the stucco and the tension, something shifted. I didn't know it then, but that morning marked the first crack in the wall Retta had spent years building. A fine hairline fracture barely visible, but cracks have a way of growing, especially when pressure builds from the inside. That evening, with the desert heat still clinging to the aluminum siding like guilt, I opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet beneath the workbench window. It let out a sound halfway between a sigh and a scrape. Inside, the air smelled of aged paper, oxidized steel, and the lemon oil I'd once used to wipe down the drawer tracks. It was a smell I'd always associated with permanence. My father used to call this cabinet our family vault, said everything worth keeping should smell like it had waited to be found. I crouched beside it with a shop rag still looped through my belt. Sprocket, my blue healer mix, sat nearby, watching me like I was about to pull out a bone. Folders inside were a hodgepodge county plats, yellowed work orders, carbon receipts from gas stations that no longer existed. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe I was just hoping for a paper trail I hadn't burned. A history that would prove I wasn't a squatter on my own system. And then I saw it. The folder wasn't thick. Its tab was faded red, barely legible in the dim light. Written in my father's blocky handwriting, "Do not trash. Still active." The date read June 1993. I pulled it out and sat on the stool by the window. The air was thick with August heat, the kind that clings even after the sun's gone down. My workshop had no AC, just a fan that spun air in tired circles. The document inside was folded twice and slid behind a warranty for a well pump we no longer owned. It was a deed of easement. Registered. Stamped. Signed by a county engineer I remembered from childhood. Trent Mabry wore bolo ties and had hands the size of lunchboxes. And there at the bottom my father's name written in navy blue ink next to the words Utility Right-of-Way Perpetual Access. I didn't speak, didn't stand. Just stared at it like it might vanish if I blinked. After a minute I slid the folder into a canvas briefcase, whistled for Sprocket, and locked up. The metal roof pinged overhead, cooling at last, but the heat in my chest was just getting started. Carl's Diner sat off Route 89 just past the Shell station and a dusty produce stand that hadn't sold a ripe tomato since the Clinton administration. The neon sign buzzed like a dying wasp, but inside the air was cold and the lights were soft. The place smelled of overfried bacon and sweet syrup baked into the tabletops. We'd claimed the corner booth years ago, Lowell and I. After retirements, divorces, civic scuffles, some places stay sacred because nobody bothers to change them. Lowell Dillard was already waiting, coffee in hand. His suit was more memory than fabric, now shoulders slouched, tie forgotten. He looked up and grinned with that weary kind of mirth that only comes from surviving battles not worth winning. "You brought something," he said, seeing the bulge in my briefcase. I slid in across from him. 1993. Easement. Signed by the county. He sipped his coffee like I'd just handed him a crossword puzzle, then unfolded the document with the reverence of a priest. I watched his eyes scan the lines twice, then again. Finally, he tapped the paper. "You know what this is? A lifeline," I ventured. "It's a loaded cannon," he said. "This thing's still enforceable. HOA has no jurisdiction over any utility system outlined here. Not above, not below." I exhaled, didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. So they're bluffing. They're always bluffing. But this time they played the wrong hand. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Crane, this isn't about plumbing anymore. It never was. This is politics in cul-de-sacs. Power in polyester. She's staking ground on the illusion that she can intimidate you into silence." He paused as the waitress brought pie pecan for him, lemon meringue for me, neither fresh. Lowell picked up his fork but didn't touch the plate. "You're not the guy fixing illegal plumbing," he said. "You're the guy they depend on if they knew it. Your system feeds 4 houses, quietly, reliably. That makes you dangerous." I raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous is a strong word. Only to people who think rules are supposed to benefit them. Retta doesn't want fairness, she wants control. And when people like you exist, her rulebook looks flimsy." I turned the pie with my fork, not eating it. What if they push harder bureaucracy? Citations. Loud letters, full of nothing. Lowell smiled. "Then we give 'em paperwork they'll choke on. Old school. Bound in those plastic sleeves nobody can remove without scissors." We both chuckled. Outside, the lights of passing trucks made shadows dance on the linoleum. "Crane," he said softer now. "You have something they don't, history. Your dad laid those pipes. That system wasn't dropped in overnight. If they want to erase you, they'll have to erase 30 years of civic laziness and government rubber stamps. I nodded, folding the document back into the folder. Sprocket yawned under the table. "Thanks for meeting me," I said. Lowell waved it off. "I owe your father more than a slice of stale pie. This is nothing." The air inside the diner felt clearer somehow, or maybe it was just the clarity that comes from having a weapon when you didn't know you needed one. We sat a while longer, trading old stories about county inspectors who wore mismatched socks and talked in acronyms. Then we parted, each heading back into the Arizona night, our breath visible under the flicker of street lamps. When I got home, I put the easement deed in a sealed envelope and slid it behind the panel in the workshop wall, one of those places only old houses have known only to those who built them. Then I sat on the back step, coffee in hand, Sprocket curled at my feet. And above the easement, the sky stretched wide and empty stars beginning to form out of the heat haze. And beneath it all, buried in the dirt and history and stubbornness, my father's pipes still ran quiet, steady, legal. And for the first time in years, I realized this fight wasn't new. It was inherited. At first I thought it was just a cardboard tube, one of those old mailing cylinders my father used to stuff with junk he swore he'd need someday. It was tucked behind a stack of oil-stained manuals in the cabinet above the fridge, the place where expired coupons and flashlight batteries went to die. I'd almost tossed it, but something about the weight made me pause. It was too dense, too precise. I slid it out, popped the cap, and slowly unrolled the brittle yellowing blueprint onto the kitchen table. There, in the bottom corner, barely legible beneath decades of fold lines, were my father's initials, H.C., in red ink. The air felt different all of a sudden, like the temperature had dropped 5 degrees. I turned off the fan so it wouldn't ruffle the edges. Outside, the cicadas had gone quiet, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. One overhead light hung above the table, casting long shadows over the paper. My hands were steady as I smoothed out the creases. At the top, in crisp mechanical lettering, Water Distribution Plan, Parcel B12 Subfeed. Beneath it, a fainter handwritten note, designed to scale, independent feed line via Parcel B12, signed Harold Crane. I'd known my dad had kept records. I didn't know he'd drafted blueprints detailed enough to pass for county engineering specs. Shamu. I opened my laptop and pulled up the latest satellite images from the county assessor's office. Over the next half hour, I compared the lines on the blueprint to the current layout of fences, feed lines, and junction boxes. Every angle matched. Every utility marker, every trench line, even the slope of the drainage, all aligned perfectly. This wasn't just memory. This was evidence. I was halfway through marking annotations on a scanned copy when a soft knock echoed from the front door. Sprocket perked up, tail stiff. He never barked unless it was a stranger. This time he just stood and stared at the door like he knew who it was. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened it. Wanda Kepley stood there in her usual lavender nightgown, a faded flannel wrapped around her shoulders despite the heat. She held something wrapped in a grocery bag, long, narrow, and splintered at one end. "Evenin', Hollis," she said. "Evenin', Miss Kepley. Everything all right?" She handed me the bundle. "Found this in my hedgerow. Thought it might belong to you." I pulled the bag back and felt my chest tighten. It was my sign, the one that used to read Private Utility, No Access. Now, cracked clean across the center, the bolt holes still lined with rust. The paint was scraped, but the lettering was unmistakable. "I saw Tanner's crew take it down Tuesday," she said quietly. "Didn't feel right. They didn't ask, didn't knock, just yanked it out like it was a weed." I nodded, the anger dull and deep. "Thank you, Wanda. That means a lot." She patted my arm with the kind of firm kindness only older women possess. "Keep your paperwork close, Hollis. Some folks don't play fair when they feel their crown slipping." She turned and shuffled back into the night slippers, whispering over the concrete. Back at the kitchen table, I laid the broken sign next to the blueprint. The two together, design and destruction, told a story louder than any speech I could give. I grabbed my phone, photographed both, then sat down and began typing. To board at cottonwoodho.org. CC legal at cottonwoodho.org. Subject, unlawful interference with recorded easement. Dear Board, attached are copies of a legally registered blueprint and original signage removed without consent from Parcel B12. These materials confirm perpetual private utility rights dating to 1993. This message serves as formal notice that HOA representatives acting outside their jurisdiction have interfered with a recorded easement. Pursuant to Arizona. Revised statutes. I request written acknowledgement of the easement's validity and cessation of any further trespass or modification efforts. Sincerely, Hollis Crane. I attached the photographs, scanned the blueprint, and even included a cropped satellite image showing the alignment. Sprocket gave a soft huff, curled by the door. I hovered over the send button, reread the email twice, then clicked. It whooshed away with that electronic finality that always feels both satisfying and risky. I leaned back in the chair, the overhead light buzzing softly. 10 minutes later, my inbox pinged. I opened it, heart oddly calm. From legal@cottonwoodho.org. Subject RE, easement, Mr. Crane, per HOA, Regulation 7.4 TI. All visible infrastructure must comply with community visual standards regardless of private permits. Permit documentation does not supersede current neighborhood appearance guidelines. Respectfully, Margot Hensley, Legal Affairs Liaison, Cottonwood Heights, HOA. I didn't curse, didn't throw anything. I just sat there, reread the email, and breathed. They weren't going to back down, not yet. This wasn't about legality. It never had been. This was about who got to speak last. I looked down at the blueprint again, then at the cracked sign beside it. They had tried to erase a line, but my father had drawn it in ink, and I still had the pen. That Saturday morning, the air was sharper than usual, like the desert had taken a deep breath overnight and decided to hold it. The mesquite trees behind my lot cast long, crooked shadows across the gravel path, and the sun hadn't yet melted the dew clinging to the metal pump casing. Reverend Gilbert Ames arrived at 6:50 a.m., sharp 10 minutes early like always. He still drove the same weathered Dodge Dakota with a toolbox in the back and a faded fish sticker on the tailgate. Most folks knew him for his sermons, but before he wore a collar, he'd run municipal water lines in 3 states and could identify pipe diameters by sound alone. He stepped out, brushed dust from his slacks, and said, "Smells like a busted diaphragm somewhere." I chuckled. "Haven't even shown you the valve yet." "You didn't have to." We walked past the low retaining wall that separated the HOA's park boundary from the older parcels. Sprocket padded beside us, tongue lolling, more interested in chasing lizards than constitutional rights. The pump substation sat half-buried beneath native stone, hidden by years of HOA landscapers planting ornamental grasses in all the wrong places. I unlocked the hatch and pulled it open with a groan of rusted hinges. Inside, the air was cooler dense with damp clay and copper. A faint vibration hummed from the pressure regulator. Reverend Ames, crouched beside the control panel, whistled low. "Valve, E2, right." "Yup." He twisted a wrench like he was tuning a violin, listened to the shift in flow, then tapped the casing with his knuckle. "See this weld," he said, pointing. "Pre-2000. Maybe older. This was done by hand. Whoever put this together knew his business. I didn't have to say it. We both knew who'd laid that line. He followed the pipe with his flashlight, tracing it through the crawl space and out toward the public access trail beyond my fence. "Funny thing," he muttered, "this feed doesn't just service your lot, it splits." "Into the HOA fountain system," I said. He nodded. "Exactly. That pump of yours doesn't just keep your well running, it's feeding their irrigation and the decorative splash pads in that park. We ran a pressure test. It wasn't hard. The gauge pinged high when we shut the HOA's municipal valve, then dipped. The second mine went offline. We repeated it. Same result." "Well," he said, wiping his brow with a folded handkerchief, "they've been riding your pipes for 30 years and didn't even know it." I leaned back on my heels. "How?" "Because nobody thinks to look. They inherit the land, not the lines. They write rules but never read the foundation." He stood and stretched, joints cracking. We were about to pack up when I found it wedged behind the old meter box, a folded triplicate invoice, the kind printed on perforated carbon paper. The top page was mostly illegible, but the second bore the faded ink of a company long gone, Crane & Sons, utility design. My father's name was printed in block letters at the bottom along with a checkmark next to Project Complete. I carefully slid it into my folder, already building the archive. Back inside, I scanned the invoice and pressure logs, then pulled up the county website. I filed an FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act inquiry, targeting the HOA's water system registration service boundaries and permits from 1993 to present. I didn't expect answers fast, but I wanted the clock ticking. That evening, after the sun had begun its slow descent into copper skies, I sat on the porch with Sprocket. My mind was calm, but my body was restless. There's something about discovery that feels like a challenge. You start to wonder just how much they've taken for granted. The air smelled of mesquite smoke and distant sprinkler mist. From my vantage point, I could see the edge of the community park, the stone fountain burbling politely, children's laughter echoing faintly, unaware their fun ran on forgotten lines. I sipped cold coffee and reviewed the email chain again, now growing into a thick braid of tension. Then I noticed movement. Near the edge of the easement path, just behind the low shrubs planted to hide the pump entrance, a figure walked the perimeter. Tall, broad-shouldered, a clipboard in hand. Tanner, the HOA's enforcer. Not an official title, but anyone who's dealt with a man like that knows the type. Muscle in a polo shirt. He didn't touch anything. Just walked, slow eyes scanning, lips moving like he was rehearsing a speech. I stayed still. Sprocket growled low and soft. Tanner paused by the trailhead, looked straight toward my house, then turned and walked back the way he came. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't just about pipes anymore. It never was. They gave me 5 minutes. 5. Retta Vornell, in her coral blazer and matching lipstick, had 3 color-coded binders, a laser pointer clipped to her lapel, and that tight, triumphant grin that made people feel small without understanding why. She stood behind the podium like she was presenting closing arguments to the Supreme Court. Me, I had 1 manila folder, a coffee-stained blueprint, and a nameplate they hadn't bothered to print. The Westgate Estates Community Center smelled of off-brand floor wax and powdered coffee. Folding chairs creaked as neighbors shifted. Someone had arranged plastic chrysanthemums in front of the podium. I couldn't decide if that made the place feel more funereal or just more fake. Wanda sat near the back, hands folded over something long and wooden wrapped in a crocheted shawl. The broken sign. Lowell Dillard leaned against the side wall, arms crossed, sleeves rolled, glasses down, low on his nose. He hadn't brought a briefcase, just a copy of the 1993 easement deed, folded once, creased sharp like a military salute. Retta tapped her microphone. This special session was called in response to an observed violation of HOA Regulation 11.2, specifically unauthorized plumbing infrastructure and visual noncompliance within Lot 47B, belonging to Mr. Hollis Crane. Her voice didn't shake. She'd rehearsed this. She flipped open her first binder. According to photographs taken on August 2nd, click projector screen flickered. Mr. Crane has installed or maintained visible mechanical equipment inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. An image appeared. My pump system, half buried, framed to look sinister under the midday sun. Zoomed in, cropped tight. Furthermore, she continued flipping to the next binder. No current permits have been filed through HOA channels, nor has any exterior modification request been approved by our architecture committee. People murmured. Some nodded. Some didn't look up. Then came the click I'd been waiting for, the laser pointer. A little red dot circled the pump housing on screen like it had committed a crime. I took a breath, stood folder in hand. The microphone was cold and oddly sticky. "Thanks, Retta," I said evenly. "I appreciate your thoroughness." A few chuckles, nervous ones. I opened the folder and unrolled the blueprint across the table in front of me. The same one I'd found in the kitchen weeks earlier, my father's initials in red ink still bold in the corner. I lifted it so the room could see, then passed photocopies down both aisles. "This," I said, tapping the map, "is a registered subfeed line blueprint from 1993. It shows a private water system routed through Parcel B12 installed by my father, Harold Crane, under county permit." Lowell stepped forward and unfolded the deed. "This easement," he said clearly, "is legally recorded with the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. HOA jurisdiction does not override recorded infrastructure rights." Silence spread dense as monsoon humidity. Then Wanda stood. She walked down the center aisle slowly, carefully. From her lap, she lifted the wooden sign, repaired, varnished, its lettering re-stenciled in bold white, "Private Utility. No access." She held it upright, facing the board. "This used to be bolted to Hollis's fence," she said. "HOA landscaping crew tore it down without notice." Her voice didn't waver. Gasps. Some folks whispered. Others leaned forward like this was a courtroom drama and they'd missed Act 1. Retta's fingers clenched around her pointer. She opened her mouth, but Lowell beat her to it. "According to ARS 33431, he said, adjusting his glasses, "any person or entity interfering with the recorded easement is subject to civil remedy." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A man in the third row, a retired electrical engineer named Hank, if I remembered right, stood suddenly half-turning toward the board. "Wait," he said. "So we've been using his system for the fountains for free since the 90s?" No one answered. The projector whirred. Retta's slides sat forgotten. I looked around. People weren't staring at me, they were staring at her. She adjusted her collar, blinked too many times. "I'm calling a recess," she said tightly for legal review. She clicked off the projector, gathered her binders in a flurry of motion, and walked briskly toward the exit. Tanner remained. He stood near the fire door, arms folded like concrete eyes locked on me. I gave him a half smile. Not smug, just resolved. Because I'd brought more than a blueprint. I'd brought the leak. And now everyone had heard it. 3 days after the meeting, the county seal appeared on the HOA trailer door. 2 sedans from the Maricopa Auditor's Office pulled into the gravel lot behind the Westgate clubhouse. The inspectors didn't wear suits, just polos with state logos and clipboards tucked under their arms. Retta's SUV was conspicuously absent, leaving behind only an oil spot and the scent of citrus air freshener. From across the street, I watched from the driver's seat of my truck, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to Sprocket breathe in the back. Reverie. Ames sat beside me, hands folded over a thick manila envelope. "You know," he said, "I used to think this place ran on passive aggression and HOA fines. Turns out it runs on your pipes and stolen funds." I gave a dry chuckle. One feeds the other. That morning had started with a knock at my door. Lowell holding a stack of papers and wearing an expression that usually preceded a sermon or a bar fight. "We found something," he said, stepping inside without waiting. The HOA's quarterly disbursement records filed with the town as required listed a vendor named Wedge Utilities, LLC. Over the past 18 months, they'd been paid just under $87,000 for emergency infrastructure maintenance. The problem, no permit records, no inspections. And Wedge Utilities, LLC was registered to a P.O. box that traced back to Tanner Greaves. "Shell company," Lowell said, thumbing through the stack. "Classic dodge. No one's checked because no one's looked. Until now." By mid-afternoon, the rumors had started. Town hall staff whispered about an impending audit. Wanda called to tell me her neighbor's cousin had seen Retta in the pharmacy frantically buying headache medicine and mumbling into her phone. And then the anonymous email. It hit my inbox at 4:17 p.m. No subject, just a PDF attached. Inside, internal HOA invoices, payment slips, and 2 expense authorizations signed with Retta's initials next to park irrigation valve realignment, handled by contractor. Reverend Ames stared at the screen, then nodded slowly. "I know that well," he said. "Old church pump. It's been dry for a year ever since Tanner's crew came in to clean up piping." "Let me guess," I said. "No permits, none, and no request from us either." We sat in silence for a moment. Then I stood, grabbed my folder, and said, "Time for some backyard diplomacy." That evening, I set up the projector. My backyard was plain crushed gravel, a pair of sagging lawn chairs, a fire pit I'd used maybe twice, but tonight it felt like a courthouse. By 7 p.m., half the neighborhood had shown up. Folding chairs appeared, lawn cushions, a thermos of lemonade made the rounds. Wanda brought cookies. The projection screen, actually a white tarp duct-taped to the fence, flickered as I clicked through slides. Aerial maps showing the original pump line traced back to my parcel. Scans of the original easement deed. Scanned invoices showing Wedge Utilities billing for non-existent work. A scanned copy of the old sign now remounted at my fence with a county verification sticker affixed to the corner. Lowell stood behind me, arms crossed. Reverend Ames sat near the front, nodding slowly as each image came up. Then I clicked to the final slide. A chart, HOA Reserve Fund, once healthy, now unusually low. "You've all paid into this," I said, looking around. "Every month, every fee. And now it's gone. Not to infrastructure, not to upgrades. To a name none of you ever voted to hire." Murmurs. Someone in the back. "Where's Retta?" Lowell leaned toward the mic. "Not here," which says more than anything. Then a voice near the edge. "What now?" Before I could answer, a woman from the auditor's office stepped forward. She wore jeans, a tucked polo, and a badge clipped to her belt. "My name's Elena Duran," she said calmly. "I'm with the state auditor's office. Based on the documents submitted and the pattern of expenditures, we've opened a formal review of the Westgate Estates HOA financial practices." You could hear the silence fall like a curtain. "No changes happened tonight," she continued, "but I strongly advise the board to suspend any further financial activity until this is resolved. That includes enforcement actions, citations, and vendor payments." Someone clapped. Then another, and then the backyard filled with applause, not wild, not explosive. Just the steady rhythm of relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, the neighborhood sounded like it believed in itself again. As the crowd trickled out, I stayed behind to fold up chairs and untangle cords. The screen came down, the cookies were gone, and the sun dipped below the ridge in a burst of tangerine light. Sprocket trotted along the fence line, sniffing each post like a sentry ending his shift. Then he froze. His ears perked. He let out a single sharp bark, then another low tense. I stepped forward, eyes scanning the tree line past the easement. Movement. Just a shadow, no figure, no face. But it was there. Watching. On my side of the fence this time. I didn't chase. Didn't call out. I just reached over, placed my hand on the wooden sign, Private Utility, no access, and felt the county seal where I'd had it added hot from the afternoon sun. This time, it wasn't just wood and paint. It was law. And it was bolted down. I woke to the hiss of broken things. Not the comforting rush of irrigation or the slow whir of the morning timer, but a harsh spray, angry directionless. I pulled on my jeans, shoved my feet into boots, and stumbled outside before dawn had even claimed the sky. Water pooled across my side yard, slicing lines through the dust like tiny shining rivers. The hose that fed the east bed drip system had been slashed near the junction valve, its end flayed open like a wound. Sprocket barked at the mess pacing along the edge of the flood as if it were a stranger. I crouched beside the pipe fingertips grazing the jagged edge. This wasn't a split from pressure. This was cut clean and intentional. I turned slowly, scanning the fence line. Nothing. Just dew silence and the faint rustle of cottonwood leaves. Inside, I dried my hands and logged into the community Facebook group. The top post, pinned just hours earlier, was a link to a Yelp review, Unsafe Utilities. This resident is a hazard to public water quality. No name, no photo. Account created that same morning. Another followed. I saw rodents near that property. Wonder if they drink from his tap. 12 likes, 2 laughing face emojis. By noon, 5 more appeared. One included a grainy image of someone else's fence. None had real names. None included actual addresses. Just vague allegations and anonymous bitterness wrapped in the pretense of community concern. I clicked through them all, then opened the folder titled Evidence Ongoing. It was time to add pages. That afternoon, Reverend Ames stopped by with a bag of groceries and his usual calm that always preceded bad news. Town Hall says someone submitted a request to revoke your easement, he said, pulling out eggs and setting them on my counter. Anonymous, of course, claimed it was improperly filed. I raised an eyebrow. From 1993? Yep. They even faxed in a photocopy of your father's signature circled in red. We both laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was rage. I've been thinking, he said, cracking a soda. They're panicking. And when people panic, they forget that cameras don't. I set up the trail cam again higher this time, tucked beneath the roofline, pointed at the side gate and utility path. I added motion sensors, patched the hoses, and posted a laminated sign at eye level, live surveillance. Trespassers will be prosecuted. That night, I barely slept. Sprocket paced the foot of my bed, ears twitching at every cicada trill and wind gust. Just after 2 a.m., he growled low and sure. At 7:18 a.m., I checked the footage. There he was, Tanner, baseball cap low, work gloves, a pair of wire cutters in one hand and a small toolkit in the other. He moved fast, looking over his shoulder as he approached the same hose junction. He paused, squatted, then reached forward. Flash. The infrared caught him mid-motion. Clear. I zoomed in, the HOA logo still stitched on his jacket sleeve. By 9 a.m., I was sitting across from Deputy Randall at the Maricopa County Sheriff's substation. By 10:15, Tanner was in a holding room, his tools bagged and logged. The footage aired that evening on local news. Fallout came fast. 2 HOA board members, Marla and George, resigned via email citing ethical concerns. Their messages leaked before the ink dried. Wanda forwarded me a screenshot from Nextdoor Looks, like the HOA's golden boy got his boots wet. About time. Retta. Well, a neighbor caught her on video the next day shouting at a teenage girl for posting unauthorized commentary about HOA issues. The video, 3 minutes of unfiltered suburban meltdown, made it to Reddit. Then TikTok. Then the local news loop tucked between weather updates and a piece about a chili cook-off. The tide had turned. The neighborhood no longer whispered behind doors. It posted, it filmed, it asked questions. Late Sunday evening, I stood by the fence hose in hand, watering the lavender patch I'd replanted last spring. Sprocket dozed nearby, belly exposed to the twilight. My phone buzzed with a notification from my email, City of Westgate office of the mayor. Subject Community Water Transition Inquiry. I tapped it open. Dear Mr. Crane, given your long-term stewardship and documentation of Westgate's legacy water system, we are reaching out to inquire whether you'd be willing to consult on a possible municipal transition strategy for neighborhood utility oversight. I read it twice, then a third time. And then I exhaled. Not triumphant, not vengeful. Just steady, because after all this time, all the signs ripped down and rebuilt, all the silence swallowed and finally spoken. Someone finally asked me to build something, not tear it out. The new sign went up on a Thursday morning under the soft light of early spring. It wasn't made of cheap aluminum or flaking plastic. It was carved oak, sealed against sun and time. The letters were deep painted a warm forest green. Westgate Community. Water Cooperative. S 2024. And beneath it in smaller script, in honor of Harold and Hollis Crane. I stood across the lawn with Reverend Ames and Lowell watching a boy from the elementary school help anchor the last bolt. His hands were too small for the wrench, but he grinned as the bolt clicked into place. The sound echoed in my chest more than my ears. 6 months had passed since Tanner's arrest, Retta's resignation, and the slow but steady unraveling of what the HOA had once claimed to be. What replaced it wasn't perfect. Nothing built by committee ever was, but it was better, honest, accountable, local, and quiet in a way that comforted instead of controlled. At the garden plots, a group of third-graders gathered around Reverend Ames. The man still wore his Sunday collar even on weekdays like this. He knelt beside the rain gauge and the new hose spigot showing the children how to test water clarity using a simple strip test. A girl with a pink baseball cap asked, "Is the water better now?" Ames smiled, wiping his hand on his jeans. "It's cleaner and earned," he said. "That makes it taste better, too." The kids giggled and passed the test strips down the line, dipping them into clear jars and holding them up to the afternoon sun. Lowell nudged me with his elbow. "You ready for your moment?" I chuckled. "What moment?" He gestured to the small podium they'd dragged out of the community center. A simple folding table dressed up with a white tablecloth and flanked by 2 planters of rosemary. "Ah," I said, "that moment." Wanda caught my eye from the front row of folding chairs. She was wearing a blue blouse, the repaired wooden sign propped neatly at her feet like a trophy from another war. I stepped up, cleared my throat, and let the soft chatter hush on its own. "I'll keep this short," I began. "Not because I have nothing to say, but because the water's already running and we've got grapevines to plant." Laughter trickled through the crowd. This system, these pipes weren't built by any one person, but they were remembered. Mapped by hand, patched by torchlight, and defended when it counted. That's what stewardship is. Not owning, just remembering what matters and keeping it going until someone else is ready to care too. A breeze shifted through the rows of seated neighbors. Some were new, others I'd known since the HOA's first vote. But if this community's learned anything, I continued, it's that control without understanding leads to silence. And silence breeds rot. Water shouldn't be hidden. Neither should decisions. Another murmur, but this one was warm. "We have a chance now," I said, "to build something open. Something real. Let's keep the pressure steady and the valves honest." They clapped. I stepped back. It was enough. That afternoon, the Cottonwood Ledger ran a piece titled "From Retired Engineer to Infrastructure Savior, Hollis Crane, and the Water That Held a Neighborhood Together." I kept the clipping, though the photo they used made me look like I'd just smelled a burnt gasket. By sundown, kids were already muddy from planting the new grapevines, 2 rows trellised neatly along the community garden's back fence. The irrigation line clicked on with the satisfying every 20 minutes. Clean water, steady pressure. The HOA fund remnants, what hadn't been swallowed by Tanner's shell company, were now earmarked for scholarships. Trades, engineering, conservation. Local kids, local futures. Reverend Ames teased that we'd birthed a co-op and a curriculum in one season. I told him I'd settle for drip systems that didn't leak. He laughed. "Dream bigger, Hollis." As twilight folded over the last hour, I lingered by the sign. My father's name looked strange up there, familiar but large, public. He'd been a man of quiet tools and late hours. He wouldn't have liked the attention, but he would have approved of the result. Sprocket curled near my boots, eyes closed but ears twitching. Behind me, folding chairs scraped as neighbors packed up. Wanda handed out lemonade from a cooler. Lowell argued with a teen about solder types. Reverend Ames listened to a boy explain how water got into clouds. The hum of community, not control, not panic, settled into the soil. I was about to call it a night when a hand tapped my shoulder. A man in his 50s stood there, windbreaker zipped halfway clipboard tucked under one arm. Beside him, a woman, maybe his wife, maybe his co-worker, smiled politely. "Mr. Crane?" he asked. I nodded. "We're from Oak Ridge Estates about 30 miles west, our HOAs, going through something. Different story, same smell if you know what I mean." I gave a soft chuckle. "Unfortunately, I do." He looked over at the new water station, then back at me. "Would you be willing to talk? Maybe help us sketch out a way forward?" I glanced around once more. The sign, the pipes humming beneath our feet, the garden beds soaking in twilight. "I've got coffee," I said, "and a blueprint or two." The sign stood steady under the early spring sun, its oak surface warm to the touch, no longer a warning, but a welcome. Somewhere behind it, the pipes hummed a quiet rhythm, just like my father mapped them decades ago. Sometimes the things we inherit aren't burdens or blessings, they're questions we're meant to answer when the time is right. For me, it wasn't about water or bylaws. It was about remembering and reminding others that quiet work still matters. Have you ever defended something small only to find it changed everything? I'd love to hear what signs you've had to stand behind.